Well. I'll tell you what, guys. I'm gonna try to hit something pretty hard here. Bear with me. I'm gonna look at some notes, things like that. I'm a little fired up. I'll admit it, um, and I'll let you know why. Because right now I'm gonna take on this issue of life. Let me put it that way, life. Um, if you don't know who I am, my name is John Solano. I've been a practicing counselor for over 35 years. I currently am a therapist within substance use disorder treatment program. So I'm right in the middle, if you will, right in the war zone of our opioid epidemic. But I've been around a long time and I've seen a lot of wars, done a lot of tours. And I like to dig deep into the human condition and share that with you. We live in some very interesting times, as we all do. We're all born into a particular place and time and deal with certain things. And one of the things we're really wrestling right now with is the issue of life itself. That's a big topic, but I'm gonna give it a shot, and let you in on some ideas that I share with the clients that I work with on a regular basis. Many of the people that I work with in all the fields. I was a family counselor, again, now I'm an addictions counselor. And in working with these folks, especially, they have had a rough go of it, to put it politely. They have had to deal with issues of life and death. Many of the folks that I've worked with actually have died and have come back to life, have been resuscitated. Many have overdosed, many have been abused severely. So they have wrestled with issues of life and death. As a family counselor, and even in addictions counseling, I often especially talk to parents, because if you're a parent, you're called that. That's your title, your well earned title, because you were involved in something called bringing a life into this world. When we talk about issues of life and death, we're talking about things that are existential. That's what that means. Things that have to do with life and death. We're talking about very, very serious matters. And I don't think we're really talking, or we're really treating those matters, life and death, with the reverence, if you will, and sacredness that we have in our past and our history. I could point to a lot of things on social media in other places where we're just not treating that with respect, whether it's the passing of a person or the birth of a child or people's pain and suffering. It all seems to be up for some form of reality TV, some form of entertainment. And, in some ways we've made a mockery of it, or have commodified it, made it, some form of currency, a commodity that can be exchanged on the social media stock market to see, how much we can get our investment to grow, if you will. So yeah, there's a lot that's going on, and we need to deal with this because, obviously we are dealing with it. Whether it be the nuclear crisis, what's going on right now with Russia, Ukraine, Korea, the nuclear crisis is real for us. Um, or whether it's the opioid epidemic, human trafficking, violence, as we've seen it. These are matters of life and death, and it's time that we really gave this some thought. So let me throw at you some ideas. One of the things that I talk about, especially if you're an American and you're listening to this, uh, is that there's something called life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When I talk with participants, with clients about this, I often say, that's a formula. That's a very significant formula. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's no coincidence that in America, we put life as the number one virtue value that we hold dear. life. All life is sacred. You wouldn't know that these days, would you? Look around. You wouldn't know it. But that's a powerful stance that this nation has taken. Life is the number one virtue that we hold dear. All life is sacred. If I would say, and I have said it, if you're an American and you don't believe that, then you're not American. That's part of what we call the American spirit. That's why we have had our hands in all sorts of different things around the world. Because if life is sacred and precious and people are being oppressed, and the innocent are being killed and taken advantage of, when people's lives are in jeopardy, the American spirit calls us to be involved. That's our number one virtue, life. All life is sacred. And if you're an American and you don't believe that, if that's not the virtue that you hold dear, then dare I say, you don't belong in the United States. You're not an American. That's just how it is. That's how the game is played here. That's the number one rule you buy into when you get on this playing field in the free world in the United States. All life is sacred, especially the life of the innocent, especially the lives of those who cannot speak for themselves. That's the way it's always been. That's what's made the nation great. I'm just going to say a little bit about the next two pieces: life, liberty, and then the pursuit of happiness. We live in a world right now where, let me just say it, people want as their number one priority, not life and not liberty. They just want to pursue happiness. So, forget life. Like let's just throw that out the window, because that's a, if all life is sacred, then we have to really watch how we conduct ourselves. We have to treat each other with kindness and respect and caring and, love and all those wonderful virtues that we like to give a lot of lip service to. But that's what that means. If we say that we stand for life, then that draws a line in the sand. It creates some boundaries. It says what you can do and what you can't do. And we live in a time right now, and look at my other videos, where narcissism has run amok. And when a community or a nation is locked into this spirit of narcissism, any other rules, anything that would get in the way of the narcissist has to be challenged and has to be eliminated. And so, of course, when the line is drawn in the sand, it says all life is sacred. Well, all of a sudden, what does the narcissist do? It starts to find all sorts of exceptions. Well, except in this situation, except in this situation, except here, except here. Well, my opinions are based upon culture, upon science, upon this, upon that. No, these are my own beliefs. And so that narcissist spirit starts to soak into things, and it starts to launch an attack, because narcissism, is also linked to grandiosity. And grandiosity says, I know everything. There's nothing greater than me. There's no opinions. There's no stands. There's no virtues greater than myself. Nobody can tell me what to do. And so we live in a time when this spirit of narcissism has saturated everything. And it's been creeping up on us pretty consistently and aggressively since the 60s, as far as the research has said. And now we're drowning in it, basically. But so we have this virtue that we hold dear. All life is sacred. Well, that gets in the way, doesn't it? It's kind of draws that line in the sand and says, you got to care about other people. You got to care, especially for the innocent and for those that don't have a voice yet, for the most innocent among you. And so we attack those things as well. When we think about life, then, okay, we all want to pursue the best life that we can possibly have. In other words, our own happiness. But there's this thing called liberty. Liberty does not mean freedom. And I want you to write this down right now as the definition, because if you're a parent, especially, you want to be teaching this to your kids. You want to be teaching this formula: life, liberty, and then the pursuit of happiness. Liberty means permission granted from a greater authority. You have to think about it from, if you will, kind of a military or nautical sense. Like if you were in the Navy and you were aboard a boat and you pulled into port, the sailors could not just leave the boat, could they? If they did, they would be breaking the law, right? And get in a lot of trouble. They would first have to be granted permission from a greater authority. That's called liberty. You're granted liberty. Once you're granted liberty, you're then free to leave the boat and go have a good time. Pursue what you like to pursue. But you can't do that until you first are granted liberty. It would be like a parent who has granted their son or daughter permission to use the car, right? Your son or daughter couldn't just take the car because that would be breaking the law. Nobody could take your car unless you first granted permission, unless you first granted liberty to do so. Now, we don't grant liberty to just anybody. We don't just give permissions, in other words, freedoms, to just anybody. Permission, to get permission to be granted liberty, first requires responsibility. So a person must adhere to a code of honor first and conduct themselves as such. And if you're in the position of granting liberty, you witness and you assess that person's moral character to see, obviously, if they're a person of integrity, if they are true to their word. And then you trust them, if you will. You grant liberty. That's the way the formula works. Life first, liberty, and then you pursue your happiness. And so can you see how in this society, people have tried to throw away the life piece? They've tried to degrade that. They've tried to demoralize it. They've tried to diminish it. Same thing with liberty. Screw that, right? A narcissist can't stand liberty because that means permission granted from a greater authority. Well, if I'm a narcissist, there's no greater authority than me. I know everything. I'm grandiose and egocentric. Egocentricity is the other characteristic of narcissism. It means the world revolves around me. So if it doesn't revolve around me and it's like people don't think I'm super special and and that I know everything, like that I'm the supreme being, that's being grandiose, right? Then how dare they? And so things like life and liberty just completely are disturbing to the narcissist. And so the narcissist has to attack, diminish, just move those out of the way in any possible way, has to usurp the authority. So the narcissist has to be the supreme authority. And then they're free to do whatever they want, which is pathological. That's what we call pathology, right? It means mentally ill. That term narcissist is a serious label. It's a description of a pathology. Somebody who's out of touch with reality. And as far as I can tell, we're in a society right now that's pretty out of touch with reality and definitely out of touch with the spirit of what it means, if you will, to live in a free world and to be American. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, in that order. If you ask people, go out and ask anybody, what do you think the definition of liberty is? They probably couldn't tell you that definition. They probably couldn't do it. They don't know the formula. That's how out of touch we've become. We need to start educating ourselves, educating our kids about what this means. This is a beautiful formula. That being said, again, when it comes to life, all right, it's existential. Now, when I say existential, what I said before was what? It has to do with matters of life and death. And those are super significant and super serious. What does that mean then? How do we treat them? Well, I said with reverence, as though they were sacred and precious. Put it this way. If there's something that you consider sacred and precious, so important in your life, let's say that it's your health. Your health is the number one thing that's important to you. Or let's say it's your finances. It's the number one thing that's so important to you. I bet you, if that's true, you're consulting a source of wisdom on a regular basis. You're not trusting yourself to make the decisions. You're trusting, you're partnering with, you're collaborating with sources of wisdom greater than yourself, right? You've got a financial consultant, you've got a life planner, you've got a nutritionist, you've got a homeopathic physician, you've got all this team of folks who have been involved in disciplines that have given them wisdom and education beyond what you have. And so you consult them. You don't just take that decision on yourself. And the more important something is in life, if you will, the more we turn to greater sources of wisdom. And so I ask you, is there anything more important than life? Well, no, not if you're American, right? Number one virtue, all life is sacred. That's the number one virtue. So when it comes to issues of life and death, we, as regular Joe Blow, myself, regular Joe, I don't trust myself to make decisions around that. I turn to higher wisdom to help me with that. Now, one could say, well, what is that higher wisdom? Because that's what a lot of people are saying right now. Well, the higher wisdom is culture. Well, the higher wisdom is education. Well, the higher wisdom is science. Boy, I can say, I mean, that's some tricky stuff. I mean, if we place ourselves in judgment of what the quality of life is, so now we have this discussion going on about whether people deserve to live or die based upon their quality of life. Well, we're talking about something really, really important, the most important thing in the world, life itself. And we're going to trust ourselves. We're going to trust culture. We're going to trust science to tell us, about the quality of somebody's life. Who gets to be in charge of talking about what the quality of life is? What does it mean to, to live the quality of a quality life? And what does it mean if you somehow are assessed or judged to not have the capacity to live up to that quality of life? If you don't have the capacity for some reason to live up to some quality of life that somebody else, a bar that somebody else has set, and you're never going to be able to live up to that bar, then you're going to be a liability. So if you're, an infant in the womb or a child or somebody who's, some part of your life has caused you to show up in the world with some, if you will, dare I say, deficits, or some lack of some kind in yourself, and you're showing up in the world that way, you're going to be seen, you're going to be judged, and you're going to be assessed as lacking and as incapable, consequently a liability, because you're not going to be able to live a quality life according to somebody else, according to science, according to culture. You're not going to be able to live that quality of life. You want that to happen? You want that to happen? That's I don't know. I was going to say that's nasty. That nobody should be able to judge that. You say, well, why? Well, again, take a look at what's going on. We live in a society where it's no longer about life as sacred. It's about whether life is convenient, whether bringing a life into this world or whether living into old age, whether that's convenient or whether that's a liability, whether you're living a quality life. According to who? Because you're getting old and, you're developing some infirmities, or you came into life with some physical or psychological infirmities, or some whatever you want to call it, and now you're a liability to the world, according to culture, according to family, according to science, and somebody has the right to be able to say that you can't have a life because you're not capable of living a quality life. You're not capable of attaining this nirvana-like experience that somebody's called quality of life. And so now, rather than this assessment, this judgment, if you will, being deferred to a higher authority or a higher wisdom, now we've got that assessment being done by, again, by culture, by science, by basically how people feel. I don't, this is the way I feel about it. It's like, oh, well, I guess that's valid, these days. Like, I'm just thinking as a clinician, and even as a human being, I mean, we should probably be grown up enough to know that we don't trust our emotions to tell us what the truth is. Our emotions are a tool, but they're also, a product of our thoughts, and our thoughts are often distorted based upon our life experiences. So anybody with any maturity would know that you don't, give 100% kind of credence, if you will, to your own thoughts. That's why we, from the beginning of time, go through an educational system. That's why when we're little, we need to be disciplined. We learn from our environment. We learn from nature. We keep learning and learning because we're ignorant. You see, we live in a society where we don't want to accept that right now. That just flies in the face of narcissism, that we might not actually know something. And so now we think we know what quality of life is. And we know that, certain people are going to be born or whatever, go through life and experience certain things that's going to cause them to lack the capacity to have a quality of life, to attain quality of life. And consequently, you're going to be seen as a liability, or maybe, we'll just have mercy on you and put you down like a dumb animal, because, that's just kind of what we do now. Because we know it all, because there's no way that you could go on and have a quality of life. See how nasty that is? That is so dark ages. It's like a part of our past that we had let go of, and now it's seeping back in. And what does it mean, again, to have that quality life? And not only that, to be a quality human being. So does that mean now that you're going to get genetically tested, and that your genetics are going to be sifted and assessed to see if there's any impurities in your genetic code? And if there is, what's going to happen to you? Because if you're alive, you're going to be a liability. So I think what's going to happen, where this is headed, is that your genetics are going to be sifted, and if you're found defective, if you will, if there's a defect somewhere, even the possibility, remote possibility, of some sort of dormant gene popping its head up because of epigenetics, that it might be uh, activated in the future, and you might not be a liability now, but you could be a liability 10 years from now or 40 years from now. You might not have arthritis now or diabetes now, but because you're genetically predisposed, and because of what the environment might do, and we're going to have to control that environment, which means we're going to tell you what to eat and what to drink. Because, Lord help us if that part of your genetics begins to, be activated, and then you become a liability and you're no longer pure. You see, this is where this is headed. This idea of purity. Does this start to ring a bell? Huh? Does this start to ring a bell when all of a sudden society gets obsessed with quality of life and the quality human being, and eliminating any person that isn't able to enjoy a quality life? And now with genetic testing and everything else, how we can see how you might be, that you have the possibility of being a liability, and that needs to be assessed and judged, and you need to be monitored, kept an eye on, just in case you become a liability and you're not able to actually fulfill this quality of life. So now this gives, I guess, what, our society the right to terminate you anytime we feel like it, because you're going to be a liability. And oh my God, it's an act of mercy. You know, I mean, how, it would be so dishonorable for me to actually allow you to live because, you're not going to achieve the highest levels of quality and that's what it's all about, right? It's about happiness. Forget about liberty and forget about sacredness of life. It's just all about happiness. And if you can't live that happy life, that quality happy life, then what's the point of even living? You see how that's disguised? And yet here underneath it, what are we after? We're after a pure race, the Ubermensch. That's what's coming, folks. And it's all disguised in mercy and love and caring and individualism and narcissism because everybody gets to make these life and death choices all on their own, just depending on how they feel. Because that's the way narcissism is. There's no source greater than myself. It's just, if you will, it's my way or the highway. There's nothing greater than me. That's the way it is. So, I appreciate you sticking with me here. I got like 3 pages of stuff, but I think I'm going to end on this. There's something else. There's something else to say on this, and it's always been said. And the Christians had it right. They have it right. And what is that? They say, you know what? We're all born sinners. In other words, we're all defective. Some people would say that. Hey, we all have issues. We all have issues, right? That seems to be true. If it's been that way from generation to generation, since the beginning of time, we all have issues. We all have baggage. The Christians say that. Yeah, you're all born sinners. We all got issues. And the price for sin is death. That's where society is right now. If you're not perfect, yeah, you may not get life, or that life could be taken from you, or enslavement. I mean, we need a few laborers around, as well. And even if you are pure, we're going to regulate how many kids you have, and we're going to regulate what you eat and what you watch, because we have to keep you pure. But the Christians have that right. And here's the piece that society doesn't have right now, right? Is that the story doesn't end there. The story doesn't end saying, hey, you're all sinners, you're all broken, you're all defective, nobody's perfect, consequently, you don't have a right to live. The story ends in a love story. The story says God so loved the world. And so we all live by grace. What does that mean? Is that some religious thing? And I think, well, no, I mean, yes, but no, it's kind of like love. Love is that great power. In relationships, like I mentioned, I was a family counselor. More times than not, I would say the majority of the time, you get 2 people coming together who are opposites. Some people say that opposites attract. On the other side of that coin, though, opposites also repulse. And a lot of times what you see is people coming into conflict because they're opposites. They rub each other the wrong way. There's friction, there's trouble. And the way to resolve the friction, the way to create harmony, is to introduce humility. You see what I'm saying? If you get 2 narcissists in a room, in other words, a lack of humility, they're going to kill each other. They're going to fight and fight and fight and wear each other down unless there's a third element introduced. And that third element is love. You see, we could talk about 2 people coming together who are opposites and go, that's not logical. Like, find somebody who's more like you, because you're just going to be at each other all the time. You got to find somebody who's more like you. You got to find somebody who shares your interests and your hobbies. And that's narcissism. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I wouldn't want to, I'd get bored of myself. Like, I got to have something different than me. But the risk of having something different than me in my life is this bit of a clash that we need to work out. But here's the deal. Love defies logic. You see, when people call logical, well, it's just logical. Well, somebody's imperfect, they're going to be a liability, and maybe we need to just remove them, or reduce them, or kind of dispose of them and dispense of them. It's like, well, that seems logical, but there's this thing called love that defies logic. There's this thing called love, and with love, there's humility, and that harmonizes the opposites and creates something better. It creates hope. And so, yes, we all show up to the planet defective and lacking. If you're a mature person at all, you know this. You know that none of us are perfect. Yet, does that mean that you get the death sentence? Absolutely not, because there's this so many wonderful virtues as well, like forgiveness and compassion and empathy, and of course, love and grace. By logic, yeah, maybe none of us deserve to be around. That's the hard message of the Christian message. None of us really deserve to live, but only by grace, only through love. And in the presence of love, there is hope. And there's not only hope, there is a quality of life. There's a wonderful life available for all of us. See, that's what wisdom has to say on the matter. That's what love has to say on the matter. But love is not something that you can scientifically or culturally encapsulate and study. Thank God, right? Because since the beginning of time, there's this thing called love, and it makes all things possible. It creates hope and possibility that even someone like me, an orphan, right? By all research, I should not even be alive today. That I should have experienced all sorts of psychological and physical problems and emotional problems. Uh, I shouldn't even be alive. The negative correlation to physical health. That's what's called the ACEs study. If you want to look at that in a more contemporary way, adverse childhood experiences. Look at that research, and you'll see how highly correlated trauma is to negative behavioral health outcomes. And yet, that's not the end of the story, because there's this thing called love, and there's this thing called grace. And when that gets introduced, there is a lot of possibility. We call it miracles. You can call it that if you want, but some really cool things can happen that defy logic, that blow our minds. And that makes it all worth it. Right? So I'll leave it there for now. And I hope that was informative. Thanks for watching. And don't forget to tune into my channel. And especially important is, have some chats with your family members about this. Right? I mean, I'll leave you with this one. It's like, if you want a good argument for life, look in the mirror. You're it. You're it. Why? Because you're not perfect. And yet here you are. You're alive. You're not dead. And you're probably doing great things in life. And you're maybe raising children, and maybe you're loving people around you, and you have a great family, and you're a good employee, and and you're serving your community, and Lord knows what you're doing, but you're probably doing a lot of great things. But yet you're imperfect. And yet you might have all these kind of weird things going on for you genetically, and Lord knows what hand of cards you've been dealt. But here you are. You're living proof. You're a living example of life. That you've been granted life. You're a miracle. Right? You're the proof. You're the living proof. So share that with your kids, your family. Have a good day. Take care. Thanks for listening.